Right now, somewhere in your body, you're holding tension. Maybe it's locked in your shoulders from yesterday's argument. Maybe it's sitting heavy in your chest, that familiar weight of worry about tomorrow. Maybe it's that knot in your stomach that's been there so long you've forgotten what freedom feels like. What if I told you that 2,500 years ago, a young man discovered exactly why we carry this burden and the surprisingly simple way to set it down? Tonight, I'm sharing 5 ancient stories that reveal the secret Buddha discovered under a tree during the longest night of his life. A secret that can transform how you carry the weight of being human. Here's what blew his mind. We think our suffering comes from what happens to us, the difficult people, the broken plans, the unexpected disasters. But Buddha saw something deeper. He realized our real agony comes from fighting what has already happened. From gripping so tightly to how we think life should be that we can't see how it actually is. It's like trying to hold water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it escapes. These aren't religious stories requiring belief or conversion. They're simply human stories about the weight we all carry and the profound relief that comes when we finally let go. Each story reveals a different pathway to stop fighting with reality. By our journey's end, you'll understand why Buddha touched the earth that night and smiled through tears of recognition. This is Echoes of Dharma. Take a breath. Let your body settle wherever you are. Let me tell you about the night that changed everything. Picture a river flowing around a massive boulder. The water doesn't argue with the stone. It doesn't demand the rock move out of its way. It simply flows, around it, over it, through every available space. And something remarkable happens over time. That seemingly soft water shapes the hardest granite into smooth, gentle curves. But we humans? We're wired completely differently. When life puts a boulder in our path, a difficult boss, a health scare, a relationship that crumbles, we don't flow around it. We ram straight into it. We push harder when it doesn't budge. We exhaust ourselves fighting immovable objects. Why do we torture ourselves this way? The answer lies deep in your ancient brain. For millions of years, your ancestors survived by controlling their environment. Predict the predator. Control the food supply. This vigilant mind kept them alive. But in our modern world, this same protective mechanism has become our prison warden. Your brain still believes that if it can just figure everything out, if it can control every variable, you'll finally be safe. So it grips your plans like a drowning person grips a life preserver. When someone cuts you off in traffic, your mind doesn't register a minor inconvenience. It screams, threat to order. When a relationship ends differently than you imagined, it's not just disappointment, it's your brain declaring that reality has betrayed you. This is why you replay conversations at 3 a.m, desperately trying to rewrite history. This is why you worry about events that may never happen, attempting to control tomorrow through mental rehearsal. This is why you carry grudges like sacred relics, convinced that holding on to anger somehow protects you from future pain. 2,500 years ago, a young prince named Siddhartha saw through this illusion. Long before neuroscience existed, he understood that the mind creates suffering by constantly grasping what it wants and rejecting what it doesn't want. He called this tanha, the thirst that can never be satisfied. Right now, notice what you're gripping in your own life. Maybe it's anxiety about a medical test result. Maybe it's anger towards someone who hurt you months ago. Maybe it's fear about a decision looming ahead. Feel how tightly you're clenching these thoughts, as if releasing them would make everything worse. But here's the profound truth that changed everything for the Buddha. Holding on doesn't give you control. It only creates the exhausting illusion of control while stealing your peace. The river doesn't control the boulder by flowing around it. But it accomplishes something far more powerful. It remains free to keep moving. Tonight, you'll meet this young prince who discovered that sometimes the most revolutionary act is to stop fighting altogether. His story will show you what happens when you finally set down the weight you've been carrying. "2,500 years ago, there lived a young prince named Siddhartha who had everything most people dream of. Palaces filled with silk and gold, gardens where peacocks wandered freely among fountains, every comfort imaginable at his fingertips. But inside this golden cage, something was eating him alive. You see, Siddhartha's father had tried to protect him from seeing any suffering in the world. No poverty, no sickness, no death, just endless pleasure and distraction. But at age 29, Siddhartha finally ventured beyond the palace walls. What he saw shattered his carefully constructed reality. An old man bent with age. A person writhing with disease. A corpse being carried to cremation. For the first time, he understood that no amount of wealth or power could protect anyone from aging, sickness, and death. That night, he made a decision that would change everything. He left his palace, his wife, his newborn son, everything he'd ever known, to find answers to the deepest questions of human existence. Why do we suffer? Why do we age and die? Is there a way to find peace in the midst of life's inevitable pain? For 6 years, he tried everything. He studied with the greatest spiritual teachers of his time. He practiced extreme meditation until his mind became razor sharp. He starved his body until he was nothing but skin and bones, thinking that perhaps suffering would lead to enlightenment. Nothing worked. If anything, he felt more lost than when he started. Finally, exhausted and defeated, he sat down under a large Bodhi tree by a river. His body was emaciated. His mind was scattered. He had tried everything the world told him would bring peace, and he was still carrying the same weight of suffering. But something was different about this night. Instead of trying one more technique or discipline, he made a radical decision. He stopped trying to escape his experience and started paying attention to it. As darkness fell, his mind began its familiar dance of anxiety and doubt. Thoughts arose. You've wasted 6 years. You abandoned your family for nothing. You'll never find what you're looking for. In the past, he would have fought these thoughts, pushed them away, replaced them with positive thinking, or distracted himself with more seeking. But that night, he did something revolutionary. He simply watched them arise and pass away, like clouds drifting across an empty sky. The Buddhist texts describe this night as a battle with Mara, the personification of temptation, fear, and delusion. But here's what's profound about this story. Mara wasn't some external demon. Mara was every voice in Siddhartha's head telling him he wasn't enough, that he needed to be somewhere else, someone else, something more than what he was in that moment. First, Mara appeared as desire. Visions of beautiful pleasures, promises of power and recognition if he would just give up this foolish quest and return to his comfortable life. These weren't external temptations, they were his own mind's desperate attempt to avoid the discomfort of sitting still with reality. When desire didn't work, Mara transformed into fear. Terrifying images of failure, visions of dying alone and forgotten, anxiety about what people would think if he never achieved enlightenment. Again, these weren't supernatural attacks. They were the same fears that wake you up at 3 a.m, wondering if you're on the right path. Finally, Mara played his ultimate card, doubt. Who do you think you are to seek enlightenment? What makes you worthy of understanding the nature of existence? You're just a confused person sitting under a tree. This is the voice that tells you you're not qualified for that job, not deserving of love, not capable of change. It's the inner critic that has kept you small and safe and miserable. And here's where the story gets beautiful. Instead of arguing with these voices, instead of trying to prove his worthiness or fight back with affirmations, Siddhartha did something so simple, it's almost anticlimactic. He reached down and touched the earth with his right hand. That's it. He touched the ground. But in that gesture was everything. He was saying, I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to be anywhere else or anyone else. This moment, this breath, this body, sitting on this earth, this is enough. I am enough. The moment he stopped fighting his thoughts, fighting his circumstances, fighting himself, something extraordinary happened. Not because he gained some supernatural power, but because he finally stopped creating additional suffering through resistance. As dawn approached, he began to see clearly for the first time. He saw that suffering doesn't come from the inevitable pain of being human. It comes from our desperate attempts to avoid that pain, to control what can't be controlled, to make permanent what is naturally impermanent. He realized that peace isn't the absence of difficulty. Peace is the presence of mind that can hold difficulty without breaking. It's not about changing your circumstances. It's about changing your relationship with your circumstances. When the sun rose that morning, people called him Buddha, which simply means the awakened one. Not because he became some perfect, superhuman being, but because he woke up from the dream that he needed to be anywhere other than exactly where he was. Now, you might be thinking, that's a beautiful story, but what does it have to do with my stress about work deadlines or my anxiety about relationships? Everything. The same pattern that kept the Buddha suffering for 6 years is the pattern keeping you exhausted right now. You're fighting with reality, pushing against what has already happened, demanding that life be different than it is. And that resistance, not the circumstances themselves, is what's wearing you down. What if, instead of fighting your anxiety, you touched the earth? What if, instead of resisting your difficult emotions, you simply acknowledged them? Here is worry. Here is sadness. Here is fear. And here I am, sitting with all of it, still breathing, still whole. This isn't about becoming passive or giving up on your goals. The Buddha didn't stop living after his awakening. He taught for 45 more years. But he stopped fighting with the fundamental nature of existence. He learned to flow like water around the rocks in his path. And that brings us to our next story, about the quiet power that can reshape mountains without ever throwing a punch. In ancient China, there was a mountain stream that had been flowing for thousands of years. Clear, gentle water that seemed almost fragile as it moved through the landscape. Along its banks stood massive granite boulders, some as tall as houses, others sharp and jagged like ancient teeth thrust up from the earth. These stones had watched empires rise and fall. They had endured earthquakes, storms, and the march of countless armies. To anyone passing by, the boulders appeared eternal, unmovable monuments to permanence in a world of constant change. The water, by contrast, looked powerless. You could cup it in your hands. A child could splash through it. It bent around every obstacle without complaint, never demanding that anything move out of its way. But something remarkable was happening that most eyes couldn't see. Day after day, year after year, the gentle stream caressed the granite. Not with violence or force, but with patient, persistent touch. Where the water met stone, microscopic changes were occurring. Grain by grain, the hardest rock was being transformed. The stones didn't understand what was happening at first. They felt the water's touch and thought nothing of it. "We are granite," they seemed to say. "We are forever. This soft water could never change us." But the water didn't argue. It didn't try to convince the stones of anything. It simply continued its gentle work, flowing, touching, in an endless rhythm of patient presence. Decades passed. The sharp edges of the boulders began to soften. Centuries went by, and deep grooves appeared where the water had persistently caressed the stone. Millennia unfolded, and what had once been angular monsters became smooth, beautiful sculptures, completely transformed by something that seemed so much weaker. Now, here's where this story becomes profound for us. In your life, you encounter granite people all the time. The boss, who never listens. The family member who always argues. The friend who takes everything personally. The neighbor who complains about everything. Your first instinct is probably to meet their hardness with your own hardness. To argue back, defend yourself, prove them wrong. But what if you became like water instead? I'm not talking about being weak or passive. Remember, water carved the Grand Canyon. Water shapes continents. Water is one of the most powerful forces on Earth. But it works through patience, not force. Let me tell you about Sarah, a woman who discovered this truth in her own life. She worked for a manager who seemed to find fault with everything she did. Critical, demanding, never satisfied. For months, Sarah fought back, defending her work, arguing her points, trying to prove her competence. All it did was create more conflict. Then, Sarah remembered this ancient wisdom about water and stone. Instead of meeting her manager's criticism with defensive hardness, she decided to try something different. When her manager snapped at her about a project, instead of arguing, Sarah simply listened. "I hear your concern," she would say calmly. "Let me see how I can address that." When he criticized her approach, instead of defending, she asked questions. "What would you like to see done differently?" At first, nothing seemed to change. Her manager remained difficult. But Sarah kept being like water, soft, persistent, non-resistant. She didn't try to change him. She simply changed how she flowed around his roughness. Gradually, something shifted. Her manager's criticism became less harsh. His demands became more reasonable. Not because Sarah had defeated him, but because her consistent gentleness had worn down his defensive edges. Like water smoothing stone, her patient presence had transformed their entire relationship. This is the wisdom the ancient Zen masters called wu-wei, action without forcing. It doesn't mean doing nothing. It means acting in harmony with the natural flow of things rather than against it. Think about the most difficult relationship in your life right now. Maybe it's someone who always seems angry or defensive. Your natural response is probably to match their energy, to get angry back, to defend yourself, to prove you're right. But what if that's exactly why the relationship stays stuck? What if, instead of being granite, meeting granite, hard against hard, creating only sparks and chips, you became water? This doesn't mean accepting abuse or allowing people to walk all over you. Water doesn't let obstacles stop it. It finds another way. If a boulder completely blocks the stream, water goes around it, under it, or over it. Sometimes being like water means setting gentle but firm boundaries. I understand you're frustrated, but I can't continue this conversation when voices are raised. The key is that you're not trying to break the other person or prove them wrong. You're simply maintaining your own flow, your own peace, while finding a way to move forward. Here's what's beautiful about this approach. When you stop pushing against someone's hardness, they often have no reason to stay defensive. Think about it. What happens when someone comes at you aggressively and you don't fight back? Not in a weak way, but in a centered, calm way? Usually, their aggression has nowhere to land, and it dissolves. But here's the most profound part of this teaching. The water doesn't just change the stone. The process changes the water too. As it flows around obstacles, it becomes more graceful, more skilled at navigating difficulties. It develops the wisdom of patience and the strength of persistence. When you practice being like water in your relationships, you don't just transform others, you transform yourself. You become more flexible, more resilient, more capable of handling whatever life throws at you. You develop what Buddhists call upaya, skillful means. The ability to respond to each situation with exactly the right touch. Right now, as you listen to this, bring to mind someone who challenges you. Instead of thinking about how you can change them or fix the situation, ask yourself, how can I flow like water around this obstacle? How can I maintain my peace while still moving forward? Remember, the goal isn't to win or to prove anything. The goal is to remain free, to keep flowing, to maintain your inner equilibrium, no matter what rocks appear in your path. And sometimes, just sometimes, you might discover that your patient gentleness has smoothed something that seemed permanently rough. Not through force, but through the quiet power of persistent compassion. Now, speaking of things we carry unnecessarily, let me tell you about two monks who learned something profound about what we choose to hold on to. In the mountains of ancient Japan, two monks were traveling together on foot toward a distant monastery. The elder monk had been practicing for 30 years, his movements graceful, his presence calm as still water. The younger monk was earnest and dedicated, but still learning the deeper teachings of letting go. Their path led them through pine forests, where morning mist clung to the trees like silk scarves. The sound of their sandals on the dirt trail mixed with bird songs and the distant murmur of rushing water. As they walked, the younger monk peppered his teacher with questions about meditation, about discipline, about the proper way to live. By afternoon, they reached a wide river swollen with spring snowmelt. The water rushed fast and dark, carrying branches and debris from the mountains above. There was no bridge, no boat, just the treacherous current between them and the path that continued on the other side. Standing at the water's edge was a young woman in an elegant kimono. She looked distressed, staring at the rushing water with obvious fear. Her silk slippers, and delicate clothing were clearly not meant for wading through dangerous currents. When she saw the monks approaching, she bowed respectfully. "Please, honored masters," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I must reach the other side, but the water is too deep and fast. Could you help me cross safely?" The younger monk immediately stiffened. Their monastic vows were clear. They were to avoid physical contact with women to maintain spiritual purity and focus. His mind raced with questions and concerns. How could she ask this of them? Surely she understood their rules? He stood frozen, caught between compassion and fear of breaking his sacred commitments. But the elder monk didn't hesitate for even a moment. Without a word, he stepped forward and gently lifted the woman onto his back. She gasped in surprise but quickly steadied herself, gripping his shoulders as he waded into the current. The water was indeed treacherous. It pushed hard against the monk's legs, trying to sweep them downstream. But he moved with careful deliberation, each step placed with intention, his breath steady despite the cold water rising to his waist. The young woman's ornate kimono fluttered in the mountain wind, but she was safe. The younger monk followed behind, watching with a mixture of shock and confusion. He couldn't understand how his revered teacher could so casually break such an important boundary. Wasn't this exactly the kind of temptation they were supposed to resist? How could someone so wise act so recklessly? When they reached the far shore, the elder monk gently lowered the woman to dry ground. She bowed deeply, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you, kind master," she said before hurrying away down the path, her figure soon disappearing among the trees. The elder monk simply adjusted his wet robes and began walking again, as calm and centered as before. Not a word was spoken about what had just happened. But the younger monk couldn't let it go. As they walked, his mind churned with questions and judgments. How could his teacher have done that? What would other monks think? Had all those years of teaching about discipline and proper conduct been meaningless? Hour after hour, mile after mile, these thoughts consumed him. The beautiful forest around them became invisible. The peaceful sound of their footsteps turned into an anxious rhythm matching his spinning mind. He wasn't walking anymore. He was carrying that woman in his thoughts, heavier and heavier with each step. Finally, as the sun began to set and they approached a rest house for the night, the younger monk could contain himself no longer. "Master," he burst out, his voice tight with frustration. "How could you carry that woman? You know our vows. You know the rules about avoiding such contact. How could you act as though our discipline means nothing?" The elder monk stopped walking. He turned to face his student, his eyes filled with infinite gentleness. There was no defensiveness in his expression, no anger at being questioned. Just the same peaceful presence he always carried. "My son," he said softly, his voice like wind through bamboo. "I set that woman down hours ago at the riverbank. Why are you still carrying her?" The words hit the younger monk like a thunderbolt. In that instant, he realized the profound truth his teacher was revealing. While the elder had carried the woman physically for only a few minutes to help her cross the river, he himself had been carrying her mentally for hours. The weight in his mind was far heavier than any physical burden his teacher had borne. The elder monk hadn't broken his vows, he had transcended them. He had seen a human being in need and responded with pure compassion, then let the moment pass completely. No clinging to pride about his good deed. No guilt about bending the rules. No mental replay of the event. Just present moment awareness, and then nothing. But the younger monk had created an entire mental prison around that single moment. He had turned a simple act of kindness into hours of suffering through his resistance to what had already happened. This is exactly what most of us do every single day. We carry conversations from last week. We replay arguments that ended months ago. We hold on to hurt feelings long after the person who hurt us has forgotten the incident entirely. We burden ourselves with mental weight that serves no purpose except to keep us trapped in the past. Think about your own life right now. What are you still carrying that happened hours, days, or even years ago? That comment someone made about your appearance. That time you felt embarrassed in a meeting. That relationship that ended badly. That mistake you made that you can't undo. You've been carrying these experiences in your mind long after they ended in reality. The beautiful teaching of this story is that you have a choice in every moment. You can pick up experiences and carry them with you, letting them weigh down your steps and cloud your vision. Or you can do what the elder monk did, meet each moment fully, respond with compassion and wisdom, then set it down and move forward unencumbered. This doesn't mean becoming callous or uncaring. The elder monk's response was deeply compassionate. He helped someone in need. But he didn't make it about himself, didn't create a story around it, didn't carry it as either pride or burden. He simply lived it and let it go. Right now, imagine setting down one thing you've been carrying unnecessarily. Picture placing it gently by the side of the road and walking on without it. Notice how your shoulders feel. Notice how your breathing changes. This is the freedom that comes from learning to live like the elder monk, fully present but not attached. Our next story shows us another kind of mental trap we create and the surprising way to escape it. In a quiet monastery nestled among bamboo groves, a Zen master gathered his students for an unusual lesson. The meditation hall was filled with the soft morning light filtering through paper screens, and the air carried the faint scent of incense from the dawn prayers. 20 monks sat in perfect rows, their robes dark against the polished wooden floor, eager to receive wisdom from their beloved teacher. The master looked at them with eyes that held both mischief and deep compassion. "Today," he announced, I want to give you a simple meditation practice. For the next hour, I want you to sit in perfect stillness and think of whatever you wish. Let your minds wander freely through any thought, any memory, any dream. The students nodded, thinking this sounded remarkably easy compared to their usual rigorous practices. But then the master raised one finger, and his voice took on a more serious tone. There is only one rule. Under no circumstances, no matter what happens, no matter how your mind wanders, should you think of a white elephant. The monks looked at each other with puzzled expressions. A white elephant? What an odd restriction. Most of them hadn't thought about white elephants in years, if ever. This should be the easiest meditation they'd ever attempted. Among them sat a young monk named Kenji, who was particularly eager to excel. He straightened his posture, closed his eyes with determination, and silently promised himself he would not fail this simple test. How hard could it be? He thought. I'll just think about my breathing, about the sound of the wind, about anything except. And there it was. The moment he told himself not to think about a white elephant, the image appeared in his mind as clearly as if one had just walked into the meditation hall. Large, magnificent, with ivory tusks gleaming and massive ears gently flapping. Its trunk swayed slowly back and forth, and its wise old eyes seemed to look directly at him with amusement. Kenji's eyes snapped open in alarm. He shook his head vigorously, trying to dislodge the image. No, 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 he whispered to himself. I must not think of this. The master specifically said not to. He closed his eyes again and forced his mind toward other thoughts. But it was hopeless. The harder he tried to push the elephant away, the more vivid it became. Now it wasn't just standing there. It was moving around his mental space, trumpeting softly, even performing little tricks like a circus elephant. When he tried to think about cherry blossoms, the elephant was standing among them. When he focused on the sound of rain, the elephant was splashing playfully in the puddles. Around the hall, other students were experiencing the same torment. Takeshi found himself mentally painting white elephants in various poses. Hiroshi discovered his elephant had started a whole elephant family in his imagination. Even the most experienced monks were struggling, their usually calm faces showing signs of strain and frustration. The more they fought, the stronger the elephants became. Some students began sweating despite the cool morning air. Others fidgeted restlessly, their meditation posture forgotten in their mental battle. What should have been an hour of peace had become an hour of warfare against their own minds. When the meditation bell finally rang, the students opened their eyes with expressions of defeat and bewilderment. One by one, they confessed to their master that despite their best efforts, they had been unable to stop thinking about white elephants. The master smiled with infinite gentleness. "And why do you think this happened?" he asked. Kenji raised his hand tentatively. Because we tried too hard not to think about it." "Exactly," the master nodded. "When you resist a thought, you give it power. When you fight against what arises in your mind, you create the very problem you're trying to solve. The thought itself is harmless. It's just a mental formation, like a cloud passing through the sky. But your struggle with it turns it into a hurricane. He gestured toward the window where actual clouds were drifting peacefully across the blue sky. Look at those clouds. The sky doesn't push them away or cling to them. It simply allows them to come and go naturally. Your mind has the same spacious quality as the sky, but you've forgotten this because you've been trained to fight with your thoughts instead of allowing them. This teaching reveals something profound about how our minds create suffering. Every day, you probably tell yourself things like, "I shouldn't be anxious about this presentation. I need to stop thinking about my ex-boyfriend. I shouldn't feel angry at my mother. I have to stop worrying about money." But notice what happens when you give your mind these commands. The anxiety gets stronger. Thoughts of your ex become more persistent. The anger toward your mother intensifies. Financial worries multiply. You've created your own white elephant, a thought that grows more powerful the more you resist it. Think about your current biggest worry or obsessive thought. Maybe it's anxiety about your health, replaying over and over despite your attempts to stop it. Maybe it's resentment towards someone who hurt you, returning every time you think you've let it go. Maybe it's fear about the future that keeps you awake at night. Now notice, how much energy have you spent trying to get rid of this thought? How much mental effort have you invested in pushing it away, analyzing it, or trying to solve it? All that struggle has probably made the thought stronger, not weaker. The Zen approach is radically different. Instead of fighting the white elephant, you acknowledge it. Hello, anxiety. I see you there. You're welcome to stay as long as you need. Instead of demanding that your mind be different, you give it permission to be exactly as it is. This isn't giving up or being passive. It's recognizing that thoughts, like weather, have their own natural rhythms. Storm clouds don't last forever, but fighting them doesn't make them pass any faster. In fact, your resistance often prolongs the very experiences you're trying to escape. Try this right now. Bring to mind a thought that's been bothering you lately. Instead of pushing it away, imagine greeting it like an old friend you haven't seen in a while. "Oh, you again. I remember you. Come on in, have a seat." Notice how this changes your relationship with the thought. When you stop fighting it, it often loses its grip on you naturally. The white elephant teaches us that peace doesn't come from having a perfect mind with no difficult thoughts. Peace comes from changing how we relate to whatever thoughts arise. When you stop being afraid of your own mind, when you stop fighting with your inner experience, something beautiful happens. The thoughts are still there, but they no longer control you. You become like the sky, vast enough to hold any weather, peaceful enough to let everything pass through without resistance. Now let me tell you about a farmer who understood this wisdom so deeply that he found peace in the midst of what others saw as terrible disasters. In ancient China, there lived an old farmer in a small village at the edge of the mountains. He was known throughout the region not for his wealth, for he had little, but for his unshakable peace of mind. While his neighbours worried and celebrated in equal measure over life's constant changes, the farmer remained steady as a mountain, accepting whatever came his way. The farmer owned just one horse, a beautiful stallion that helped him work his small plot of land. In that time and place, a horse was everything: transportation, farming equipment, and security all rolled into one. Without his horse, survival would become infinitely more difficult. One morning, the farmer went to feed his horse and discovered the gate hanging open. The stallion was gone, vanished into the vast wilderness beyond the village. The neighbours rushed over when they heard the news, their faces filled with sympathy and distress. "What terrible luck!" they exclaimed. "How awful for you! What will you do now? This is such a disaster." They shook their heads and offered condolences as if someone had died. But the old farmer simply looked at them with calm eyes and said, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" The villagers were bewildered by his response. How could he be so casual about such a catastrophe? Didn't he understand what he had lost? They walked away, shaking their heads, convinced the old man had finally lost his mind. 3 days later, the missing horse returned. But he didn't come back alone. Behind him followed 12 wild horses, a magnificent herd that had apparently accepted the stallion as their leader. The farmer now owned 13 horses instead of one. The same neighbours came rushing back, their faces now bright with excitement and envy. "What incredible fortune!" they shouted. "You're the luckiest man in the province. Think of how wealthy you'll be. What amazing good luck." Again, the farmer looked at them peacefully and said, "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" The next week, the farmer's only son was working to break in one of the wild horses. The animal was spirited and untamed, bucking and rearing with tremendous force. During the training, the young man was thrown violently to the ground, breaking his leg in 3 places. Once more, the neighbours gathered, this time wringing their hands with worry. "What a terrible turn of events," they cried. "Your poor son. And just when your fortune had changed for the better. What cruel bad luck." They looked at the farmer with expectant sympathy, waiting for him to share their distress. But the farmer's response was exactly the same. "Good luck, bad luck, who knows?" The villagers were beside themselves. How could this man be so heartless about his own son's injury? How could he remain so detached from such clear misfortune? They began to whisper that perhaps he truly was losing his mind with age. 2 weeks later, war broke out with a neighbouring kingdom. Army recruiters swept through every village, drafting all the young, healthy men to fight in what everyone knew would be a brutal and deadly conflict. one by one, the sons of the farmer's neighbors were taken away to war. But when the recruiters came to the farmer's house, they took one look at his son's badly broken leg and declared him unfit for military service. The young man would stay home, safe from the violence that would claim so many others. Now, the neighbors understood. What they had seen as terrible misfortune, the broken leg, had actually saved the young man's life. What they had celebrated as incredible luck, the wild horses, had led to the very injury that would prove to be a blessing. Every event they had labelled good or bad had contained the seeds of its opposite. But by now, they knew what the farmer would say if they asked him about this turn of events. Good luck, bad luck, who knows? This ancient story reveals something profound about how we create suffering through our constant need to label and judge our experiences. Every day, you probably do exactly what those villagers did. Something happens, and immediately your mind rushes to categorize it. This is good. This is bad. This is a disaster. This is wonderful. But life is far more complex and interconnected than our quick judgments can grasp. What looks like a setback today might open a door you couldn't have imagined tomorrow. What feels like a triumph this week might lead to challenges next month. The farmer understood that rushing to judge each event was not only pointless, but actually increased suffering. Think about your own life. Maybe you lost a job and saw it as pure catastrophe, only to discover later that it led you to a much better career. Maybe a relationship ended and you were devastated until you met someone who was a much better match. Maybe you didn't get into your first choice college and felt like a failure, but the school you attended gave you opportunities you never would have had otherwise. The farmer's wisdom doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to what happens in your life. It means holding your judgments lightly, recognizing that you don't have enough information to label most experiences definitively. It means staying open to the possibility that what seems terrible today might contain hidden gifts, and what seems wonderful might bring unexpected challenges. When you catch yourself declaring something the worst thing ever or absolutely perfect, pause and remember the farmer's words, good luck, bad luck, who knows? This simple phrase can free you from the exhausting emotional roller coaster of constantly judging your circumstances. Instead of wasting energy deciding whether each event is good or bad, you can focus on responding skillfully to whatever arises. Like the farmer, you can develop the wisdom to remain centered regardless of whether life brings wild horses or broken legs, lost opportunities or unexpected blessings. The deepest teaching here is about acceptance without resignation. The farmer didn't passively accept everything that happened. He still worked his land, still cared for his son, still lived his life fully. But he held it all lightly, without the desperate need to control outcomes or force life to match his preferences. This is the ultimate freedom, the ability to live fully while holding your circumstances with an open hand, knowing that the next chapter of your story hasn't been written yet. And that brings us to the heart of what all these stories have been pointing toward. These 5 stories all point to the same profound truth. Peace isn't found in controlling life, but in learning to flow with it. Like the Buddha under his tree, you can stop fighting your inner experience and simply touch the earth of this moment. Like water around stone, you can meet life's obstacles with patient gentleness rather than force. Like the elder monk, you can set down the burdens you've been carrying long after they served their purpose. Like the meditation students, you can stop fighting your thoughts and allow them to pass like clouds through an open sky. And like the wise farmer, you can hold your judgments lightly, knowing that today's disaster might be tomorrow's blessing. Right now, take a breath and feel the weight you've been carrying. What would it feel like to set just one burden down? To stop pushing against just one unchangeable reality? To flow around just one obstacle instead of ramming into it? This is your invitation. Stop fighting with life and start dancing with it. The peace you've been seeking isn't something you need to achieve. It's something you can remember right here, right now. If these stories brought you a moment of peace, subscribe to Echoes of Dharma for more ancient wisdom for modern hearts. Until next time, remember, some things are meant to be held lightly. Rest well.